Okay, so we've gone through how carbohydrates digest and kind of like the more technical side of things, the theory behind it, I guess. Now we're going to have a look at how we apply that in our pre-workout nutrition and nutrition during the session itself as well for performance. If you don't have a notepad, I suggest you pause this, go and grab one, because you're going to want to work this out for yourself so you know kind of where you should be consuming carbohydrates and how many grams at certain points, okay? So, first of all, let's go to the pre-workout nutrition and how to fuel our session. So what we're looking to do is make sure that we've got enough carbohydrates stored in our body ready to do the session that's coming up. Now, the closer we are to our session in terms of the meal that we're eating, the simpler the carbohydrates we want, okay? So we want them to break down quicker. So if it's an hour before the session, we want some nice simple carbohydrates that are going to break down and digest quite easily. The further away from the session, so let's just say 4 hours prior to the session, we can have stuff that's a little bit more complex and has got a moderate level of fiber in there. And the reason why we might want to do that is because it just slows down the digestion of those carbohydrates and prevents any sort of spikes. So that means that 4 hours prior, we have a little bit of fiber with our carbohydrates so that actually it breaks down a little bit slower and we're good to go, ready for our session 4 hours later. What we want to avoid is having too much fiber straight before the session. First of all, because let's just say an hour before. So first of all is because it's going to slow the breakdown of carbohydrates. And secondly, having fiber in our stomach while we're doing high intensity training might not be very pleasant because our digestive system's trying to work to break it down. So simple carbs closer to the session, slightly more complex a bit further on before the session. Okay, so anywhere up to 4 hours. So how would that look? Well, directly before the session, an hour before the session, we could have something like a banana, or we could have a white bagel with jam on it, for example, or some white bread with jam on it. Really super simple carbohydrates, piece of fruit, something like that. What would we want to have, let's just say 3 to 4 hours before that? Well, we can have a little bit more of a bigger meal, so we could have a little bit of pasta, for example, so some nice brown pasta with a little bit of protein in there, some chicken, all that sort of stuff, and some veg, okay? That would be absolutely fine, 3 to 4 hours prior to the session. Maybe 2 hours before the session, it might be worth having some form of porridge, okay, with a little bit of peanut butter in there as well. So you've got some fats in there to slow that breakdown of carbohydrates down ever so slightly, ready for your session. And I will pop some recommendations for pre-workout meals as well in this app in the resources, as well as what you could eat on the move. So that's pre-workout, okay? So just to clarify, between 4 hours prior to your session, the 1 hour is going to be more simple, the 4 hours is going to be more complex. How many grams of carbohydrates should you consume in this period? So in the period of 1 to 4 hours prior to your session, you should consume anywhere between 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrates per kilo of body weight in that period. Okay, so you wouldn't want to leave that until the last minute and go and smash in 300 grams of carbs directly before your session, because it'd probably take a bit long to digest and it wouldn't be very good for your gut. But in that entire period, that's the recommendation anyway. Moving into during our session. Now, this depends on the length of the session. Obviously, the intensity as well is going to have an impact, but mainly the length of the session. What we're wanting to ensure is that we've got enough carbohydrates that are in there, in our body, ready to be utilized throughout the session, so that we're not going to fatigue by the end of it or lose performance throughout that session itself. Anything between 0 to 60 minutes, so anything up to an hour, you don't really need to consume any additional carbohydrates in that period, because the stored carbohydrates that you've got in your body are likely to cover that entire session, so you don't need to consume carbs during that session. It's probably going to be more of a hindrance trying to digest those carbohydrates. Anything between 1 to 2 hours of training, that's where you might want to start fueling yourself with some carbohydrates. And that could be anything up to 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour of training. So you wouldn't want to leave it to the 60-minute point and start hitting 30 grams. You probably want to start breaking that down. Maybe after 20 minutes, just have some form of quick digestible carbohydrates, maybe 15 grams. Then another 20 minutes down the line, another 15 grams, and work it like that. Obviously, it depends on what intensity you're working at and when you can get those carbohydrates in you, but that's a good kind of rule of thumb for that kind of length of session. If you're doing 2 to 3 hours, you're going to want to bump those carbs up to more like 60 grams per hour. And then anything from 3 hours plus, you might be working up to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour just to keep on top of those glycogen stores and make sure that you're fueled correctly throughout that full training session. Obviously, it's something to play around with and see what your gut feels like when you're actually fueling yourself. This is very much a trial and error thing, so ensuring that you're trialing it, especially for any future expeditions or any races or events, anything like that, you need to understand how you're actually fueling those sessions and what's going to work for you on the day. Now, expeditions and kind of low intensity walking, slightly different, but we're going to go into that in other videos. This is more kind of training sessions where you're doing long runs, long hikes where you're working at a decent, reasonable intensity. So then, what food do you want to eat during your sessions? Well, it needs to be quickly digestible, and this is where people use things like sports drinks, so Lucozade Sport, so not the fizzy one, Lucozade Sport, where you can get some carbs in you and hydrate as well. People also use gels. So a lot of the gels, the recommendations are that you find a gel that's got a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose. Now, this may sound a little bit confusing, a little bit over the top and scientific, but let's just break this down. So we spoke about carbohydrates turning into glucose to be used as energy, and they go into the small intestine and they get digested very, very quickly. So the idea behind having a 2-to-1 ratio for glucose to fructose is that the fructose actually gets digested and broken down in the liver, and it has a slightly different digestive pathway to then end up going into the bloodstream later on. So it's a little bit better in terms of how your digestive system's going to hack those carbohydrates getting broken down in the body. So if you went pure glucose, chances are that you're going to get a lot of fluid into the gut straight away for digestion. That's why people get a lot of diarrhea from smashing in lots of gels. So by having a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose, that can help with digesting in the gut. Okay. Obviously, you need to play around with these and see. Some people, just this wouldn't help at all. It wouldn't be very good because their digestive system just can't hack it. Obviously, you can have solid foods. You can have stuff that's just nice and quickly digestible. Things like flapjack you could have. You could have some bagels with jam on it, all that sort of stuff. But you just got to consider that sat in your stomach if you're running, bouncing up and down, and how much of that you're consuming. You just want to make sure that you're just snacking on bits. Some people, have sweets, Haribo, all that sort of stuff, just to keep their glucose levels nice and high. So by managing it through your training session, making sure that you don't burn out before that end of the session, essentially, that's what we're looking for, to keep those glycogen stores nice and high throughout that session. But that's basically fueling yourself prior and fueling yourself during the session with carbohydrates to keep your energy nice and high.